Good afternoon, folks. Good
Hello.
afternoon. Hi. Welcome. Welcome to the Substance Misuse Prevention Community of Practice event using the science of hope to mobilize communities featuring clinical psychologist and vice president of the Center of Trauma Responsive Practice Change, Dr. Alison Roy. The COP is funded by the Bureau of Drug and Alcohol Services and coordinated by a committee of folks that represent the views of the prevention field in partnership with the New Hampshire Technical Assistance Center and Growth Partners. So welcome, welcome. We are recording today's meeting, so we ask that everyone stay on mute with your microphone when you're not speaking. And if you're having any internet issues, you can try turning off your video camera or join us by phone. And if you're having any trouble hearing, go ahead and you can try to expand the audio icon, open the audio settings, and there you can select a different speaker from the menu or adjust the volume there. I can see folks are still coming in. Welcome, everybody. As a result of participating in today's meeting, you will gain knowledge of social neuroscience and the science of hope, and explore in small groups how you can apply this science to your role, your organization, and your work in communities. You'll also gain insights on how you can create a community of care that focuses on prevention and early identification of needs and services. So those are the goals for today's meeting. Today's meeting will feature instruction provided by Dr. Alison Roy, and we'll go back and forth between her presentation and small groups. So you will be working with the same small group throughout today's meeting. And then finally, certificates will be issued that you can use to apply towards CEUs once the meeting is toward the end. So we'll provide that link in the chat when we get toward the end of our meeting. So each small group, I want to make sure everybody has a solid understanding of how these small groups will go. We'll have approximately 5 to 8 people, some a little more, some a little less, in each group that have been pre-assigned. And we would like for each group to assign a facilitator. So that person will be the facilitator for the duration of today's meeting. And they will be in charge of keeping track of the time and making sure that everybody contributes and has an opportunity to share during your small group. We do ask for folks to please go ahead and unmute yourself and enable your video camera as your internet allows you to when you're in your small group. And we're going to go ahead and get folks ready for your very first small group. Can see somebody's in the waiting room there, Mana. Okay. So in our first small group, it's a very easy one. We want you to go ahead and just introduce yourself, where you work. We want you to share one thing that comes to mind when you think about change, and decide on who will be the facilitator for your group for today's meeting. And again, that person will just help the conversation go and keep track of time. You will have a total of 7 minutes in this small group. And Mana will broadcast and let everybody have a visual kind of alert when there's 1 minute left in your meeting time. Are there any questions before we go into our small groups? I know some folks are just joining the meeting and will be placed into their small groups. So for those of you that are with us, if you could just bring them up to speed, I'd appreciate that. Okay, no questions? All right, let's go ahead and head into our first small group introductions. We'll see you back here in 7 minutes.
We're waiting for a few more.
Thanks, folks. So Dr. Alison Roy has worked with children, adolescents, adults, and families across 3 different countries, devoting her career to the study and treatment of traumatic and chronic stress. She spent more than 2 years as a psychologist for a partial hospitalization intensive outpatient program for adolescents, an advanced training in dialectical behavioral therapy, or DBT, For adolescents, Dr. Roy recently joined Dr. Cassie Yackley to create the Center for Trauma Responsive Practice Change, whose mission is to promote a trauma responsive system of care for children and families in New Hampshire through the provision of high quality training and consultation services to communities. So we are certainly delighted to have you with us, Dr. Roy, and I'll go ahead and turn the meeting over to you now.
Thank you. I've got some sort of, okay, pop up here. There we go. Hi, everybody. I'm very, very excited to be here. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and get us started for this first part of today. So what I want to kind of talk about today is really hope. And we're gonna look at the science of hope from a couple of different kind of facets, and to be really able to understand some of the syndemic effects that this group has been talking about. So looking at really, if we're going to talk about preventative care in the state of New Hampshire, what do we need to start looking at? What do we need to really start kind of tackling within our communities of care, our systems of care, within our organizations that we work with, and really even just for ourselves and looking at ourselves. So part one, I'm calling today, this first part is called, I'm calling it knowledge, because really one of the first stepping stones of understanding the science of recovery and hope, and we're going to talk a lot about stress today and how stress gets us to a certain point in our lives, is really understanding the science of behind some of the effects, the syndemic effects that we're seeing. And having this knowledge is, it provides us with a few things. It provides us with validation. It provides us with the ability to see someone's actions and reactions in their world as a response that makes complete sense, that doesn't look abnormal. It doesn't look pathologized. Really, we're talking about the science of normalizing behaviors that are due to our experiences. I know this group is familiar with adverse childhood experiences, ACEs, epigenetics, that concept of generational trauma or stress being passed down literally within our genes or our cells. So I know this group is familiar with a lot of those concepts. We're really going to give the science or the neurology behind why we see these concepts persisting and existing. And it really does give us a lot of weight as to some of that preventative care options that we have. So I'm starting today with this. This is a graphic of a genogram. Some of you with the work that you might do might be familiar with what a genogram is. So what this is a way of looking at a family tree. And so it's a different way of looking at a family tree. And so I'm starting with this because I wanted to talk about a young man I had the experience of working with, and he's really going to be our picture of how to generate hope as a strategy or intervention. And so I did my internship year, which is for us as clinical psychologists. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist. It's our residency year. We have to apply. We have to rank order our places. We have to be matched. So it's a pretty rigorous process. And I was very, very lucky to be matched at the Milton Hershey School, which is a highly specialized school in that Milton Hershey and his wife, Catherine, couldn't have their own children. And so they created this home away from home for children that didn't have parents in Hershey, Pennsylvania. And all of the Hershey money, yes, the chocolate, goes to this school. It's the third largest endowment behind Harvard and Yale. So it's a massive kind of program. It's an amazing program. And I was lucky enough to be a psychologist there for a year. And I had a young gentleman in the high school level who came to me for counseling. And we created one of these together. I create these with most all of my clients. And we created this genogram together. It was much more involved than this one. This is just an example, much more involved than this example. But what it showed to us, this was a young man who came from just outside New York City, his family was heavily involved with the Crips gang. And when we have a death or a loss on a genogram, I put an X through that person. Every male figure on this child's genogram had an X through it. And so this child who came from home to this school to really kind of see a future was starting from this place. And I said, what do you see when you look at that? And he said, I see my fate. I see what I'm set up to do. And so in this instant, as you can probably imagine, for him to have hope, for him to be able to hear me when I said to him, you know, have hope, have faith, let's work through this together, we're going to build this together. It was a concept that he couldn't hear. He wasn't ready for, he wasn't in the place for that. And for him, it was invalidating, right? It was going to miss where he was at. And so that's our starting place today, is to really understand why hope works, how it works, and yet how we create that within a relationship, that it actually is something that's productive. So let's start there today. And we're going to revisit him at the end, don't worry. So let's talk about our survival pathway. And what that is really our brain being in this place of just getting through every day. And when you're in that spot of just having to survive or get through every day, hope is a foreign concept. Because the definition of hope is really being able to see beyond tomorrow. And so if you're in constant survival mode, if you've had a lot of ACEs, if you have a family that's really struggling with resources or homelessness, substance use in the home, they're living day to day. They might not be able to see beyond their next 24 hours. So for them to use hope as intervention is really difficult. So we're going to talk about how we're going to get that to be a part of their lives. But let's first look at what our survival brain looks like. How do we get to that spot? What is it like to be in that spot? And I think hopefully this is relatable for a lot of us in this current context, this current world where COVID-19 has stressed so many of us and so many of the families or the individuals that we work with, to a point that this is where they're operating from, at least a majority of the time, this survival brain, or this fight, flight, or freeze brain. So when we're in this survival mode, what happens is, and actually even normally, so this is a process that exists for us biologically for very good reasons, right? We need this survival mode. If we're in a life-threatening situation, we need this to kick in. We want this to kick in. So for example, if we're being chased by a bear, we want this system to kick in to make these decisions for us to help save our lives. This system's very helpful in those situations. It's not helpful when it's kicking in day after day because of some of the stressors that I just mentioned. So let's just look at what really happens at a cellular level with this system. So our amygdala, which is a tiny structure in our brain, is like our smoke alarm, our smoke detector of our brain. It constantly is working to scan our environment to see what might be upsetting, overwhelming, alarming, anything that we might have to take care of, any threat that's in our kind of immediate proximity. If the amygdala detects anything, it could also be something, a thought. So it could be a memory, it could be thinking about, where's my next food gonna come from? How am I gonna pay the rent? So those types of thoughts will also trigger this amygdala to be very active. So when the amygdala is activated, saying something's not right, something's uncertain, something's overwhelming, it causes this cascade of actions and reactions to happen. So what happens is the amygdala triggers our reptilian or survival brain to take over, to be in the driver's seat. Again, helpful if we're actually trying to survive, not helpful if we're trying to be a human, live our day-to-day lives. And so it activates that reptilian brain. It shuts off action or any sort of neuronal activity to our frontal lobe, which is where all our learning and our thinking and our empathy, all those beautiful executive functions happen. Our memory processes shift, and our ability to socially connect with each other is really difficult through language. So our social communication through language is also shifted. So let's take a little bit of a deeper dive look at this. So this is the polyvagal theory of the stress response system. And what we're talking about right now is our stress response system, right? Our system that responds or activates when stress is in our environment. So we all have this optimal zone of arousal, or this window of tolerance that hopefully we operate out of most of the time. If our amygdala starts to sound the alarm, we get bumped into one of the other two zones. So our optimal zone of arousal is called our rest and digest mode, meaning all of our body systems are at rest, our heart rate, our respiration, our blood pressure. and we're literally able to digest our food, right? Our stomach's has one of the biggest impacts from stress. So we hopefully spend most of our time there. However, if we're in the middle of a global pandemic, if we're fighting resource deprivation, if we have a history of trauma, history of ACEs, there's a lot going on. We don't spend much time in our optimal zone of arousal, and that starts to have a huge impact on the rest of our body systems. This is why, for most of you who are familiar with ACEs, this is why ACEs, or social determinants of health, make us physically ill, because it has such a huge physical impact on our body. So here's the science as to why that actually happens, and why we see some of the endemic effects that we see. So hyperarousal, one of the zones you could be pushed into by your amygdala, is when everything gets sped up. So your heart rate goes really rapid, your breathing gets rapid and shallow, your blood pressure goes up, you have adrenaline and cortisol coursing through your veins. This is fight or flight. So this is your body preparing to fight something off or to run away. Again, helpful if you're a parent witnessing your child and having to lift. This is where a parent has that superhuman strength to lift a car off a child. This is where that comes from. So it's good in those small, very tiny windows of time. It's not good if it's happening long periods of time or most of your lifetime. Adrenaline and cortisol are chemicals or things that are released into our system that make us quite ill if we don't actually need them or use them in that moment. So that's fight or flight. Hypoarousal at the bottom is freeze. So this is when our body slows everything down to kind of avoid stress or get away from stress. That way we freeze, we go within, we stop. And so everything just kind of slows down. So what does that look like for all of us, for the people we work with, for our colleagues, for anyone we might come in contact with? And again, this is the knowledge part. This is where knowing this is helpful to give us this lens of, might be what's going on for someone who is presenting as really angry or irritable or using substances or self-harm when they have some of this stress response happening for them. So on the left-hand side, you'll see hyperarousal, that fight or flight. These are some of those reactions we're going to see, and they make neurobiological sense, chemical sense as to why they're effective. So irritability, anger, yelling, physical and verbal aggression, right? You've got adrenaline flowing through you. It's got to go somewhere. So this is how it comes out if you don't actually have something to fight off or run away from. We're going to see self-harm and substance use on this side, because when you're feeling that way, you're all revved up, you're having adrenaline and cortisol released, you have to do something to kind of counteract that. And so self-harm and substance use is actually really effective at counteracting some of those other chemicals that we see happening. You also lose your sense of time, meaning, again, here's that concept of having to live in the moment, live day by day. That's what this does to our brain. It kind of cuts us short with the ability to see the future. That's important for us to know in this kind of science of hope that we're talking about today. On the right-hand side, you've got hypoarousal, that freeze mode. For those of you that work with children and adolescents, this is the side that I actually worry, these are the kiddos I actually worry more about, because they tend to withdraw, they tend to go within, they don't want to have, so they're avoiding everything, right? So they're avoiding in social interactions, they're avoiding emotions or feelings or things that are going to overwhelm that stress response system and cause their amygdala to activate. They want that to stop. So they try to do that avoiding technique. We hear this from adults even. I'm fine, I'm okay, as the world is burning down around us, right? This is our kind of attempt at avoiding. We're going to see self-harm and substance use on this side, because often what happens is people feel numb, they feel checked out, they feel like they're having, they're not grounded in their physical body or space. And so they're using self-harm or substances to try to feel again, to feel something again. Because they're feeling pretty devoid of any emotions as a strategy, right? That's what their body and brain are kind of doing as a strategy to help calm that stress response system. Couple more slides, and we're going to break for that first breakout session, our small group session. I just want to kind of also talk about the systems that are most impacted by this stress response system happening. So we have children, adolescents, and families that have a high stress or traumatic background. They're having this stress response system constantly activated. They're having some signs and symptoms of those hyper and hypoarousal that we just looked at. They're also going to have some symptoms, physical symptoms happening, mostly in these three areas. So these are the three neurodevelopmental systems or functions that are most disrupted when we're feeling that constant stress. So again, you can see how substances would play a part in helping this to feel better as a coping strategy to some of these reactions or actions that are happening in the body. So sleeping, we're going to see individuals who have a constant chronic stress response, having a hard time falling or staying asleep. We're also going to see lots of nighttime disturbances like nightmares, night terrors, night wakenings. So you can imagine how disruptful that would be. And then it leaves you at when you wake up, you know what it feels like to not feel rested, to have that happening day in and day out. That's also going to have a major impact on your overall health, your immune system's ability to work. So you can see how all these factors and symptoms start to kind of play into each other. Eating, we're going to see individuals eating too much to self-soothe. So again, another soothing technique or coping strategy to try to feel better, or not eating enough. So we're going to see both of those systems as a both of those kind of outcomes as a possibility. And again, they kind of play different roles, and there might be different reasons why, or etiologies why that's happening. So eating is also something that we have as humans almost complete control over. And when you're feeling very out of control due to your stress response system sounding the alarm constantly, eating something you can control to feel better. And then the last one is elimination. And again, this gets back to that rest and digest. As soon as we move out of that rest and digest zone, our digestive system is very largely impacted. And so I actually heard a really interesting story on NPR about a month ago about how primary care doctors or GPs are prescribing digestive aids at an alarming rate right now. And it makes sense because stress definitely impacts our ability to digest. It causes heartburn and indigestion. So again, just to kind of think about how this all impacts not only just physical health, mental health, overall functioning, and why some of the strategies that we see that the people in our community that we work with using, like turning to substances or self-harm, why it makes sense, how that fits into this kind of puzzle of symptoms or behaviors. Okay, last one before I release you into some small group discussions. So this is really important for, especially for those of us in the mental health field or their schools who have any sort of ability to diagnose an individual. To look at, and I can also, Mary Ellen and I talked about sharing these slides, so I can certainly share these as a resource. This recording will be up on the webpage as well. Because this slide, I want to shout from the mountaintops right now, especially after following this very difficult 18 months that we've all had, is what we see is the two rows that go across. So the top row is that hypoarousal. We call it the dissociative or kind of row. And the bottom row is the arousal or hyperarousal row. So what you're looking at is what happens when we spend a lot of time in those kind of areas, hyper or hypoarousal, instead of that optimal zone of arousal. And I should say, we all have the ability to go hyper or hypoaroused. For the most part, our body kind of chooses in the kind of survival situation, which would be most helpful. So my example of being chased by a bear, hopefully your body system chooses freeze, right? You don't want to try to fight the bear off or run away. You want to just kind of curl into a ball and freeze. So we all have the ability to go either way. Some of us have a tendency, and as I was talking about that, you might have said, oh, I'm definitely a hyperarousal or I'm definitely a hypoarousal. So some of us have a tendency to maybe lean one way or the other if we're stressed. Gender-wise, I will say that research shows there's a gender difference. Again, it's not a given, but there's some statistics there where men tend to be more hyper-aroused, women tend to go more hypo-aroused. So anyways, just to kind of think about that. But so these two rows that go across, the response and then the diagnoses that it could mimic or be comorbid with. So to kind of look at what those things might look like, what stress response might look like, ADHD is the number one it's gonna kind of mimic or look like. We have a hard time concentrating, attending, and focusing and sitting still when we're really stressed, when we're having that stress response. So just to kind of think about some of that overlap that might be having, some of what we might be seeing with some of those comorbid diagnoses in the populations or communities that we work with. Okay, so I'm going to kind of set you up for this first small group, and Mary Ellen's going to help me with that. But really what we want you to focus on in your small group discussion is what or how does this information resonate with you, both personally and professionally? Is there something that you could pull from this knowledge piece that you feel like we're seeing that or have experienced that or that makes sense moving forward into this small group?
So during your first small group, hopefully all of you were able to identify a facilitator. If you didn't get to that point, that's the first thing you need to do in your small group is identify who's going to go ahead and keep track of time, make sure that everybody has an opportunity to contribute and share and keep the discussion a little bit on point. We're going to go ahead and give you 5 minutes for this one question discussion. Please make sure that everybody has an opportunity to share briefly what resonates with them. And we'll go ahead and send you into your groups for 5 minutes. Any questions before we send you there? Okay, pretty straightforward. We'll see you back here in 5.
Do you want me to stop share?
Nope, you can
Okay.
keep sharing. Hold on 1 second here. It's going to be quite the editing task for you, Mana. I'm sorry. Hey, welcome back, folks. Welcome back. Hopefully you had some good discussion in your small groups. Does anybody want to share what how this information resonates with you both personally and professionally? Encourage you to go ahead and just enter into the chat if you want to share with folks what resonated with you personally. Go ahead and enter that right now into the chat. If there's something that stuck out for you. We're going to use all means of technology today. Okay. And as folks are entering that information into the chat, Dr. Roy, if you want to continue on, and we might circle back around and share some of these later on in the meeting.
That's great. Absolutely. Okay. So if part 1 was knowledge, part 2 is definitely all about action. So, all right, I have this information now. I understand what it's, kind of perspective taking or being able to take the perspective of some of the individuals I work with and what might be going on for them. So what can I now do about it, right? This is we're for the most part, for most of us in this meeting today, we're helpers. We're in helping professions. And so we like to get to this piece of talking about how do we quiet that survival pathway? So if it's being chronically activated, if it's the kind of primary driver in a human or a person that we work with, there are definitely some things that we can do to help that, even in that moment. So say you're a therapist working one-on-one with someone, to be able to quiet that survival pathway enough to be able to get the rest of their brain to come back online. Because that's really what happens is our reptilian brain is definitely in control, and to be able to kind of be able to open up the brain and different pathways, not just the survive pathway, but like we like to say, the thrive pathway can come online. And so for my little guy that I started off this meeting talking about, you can see how, based on what he had been through prior to coming to the Milton Hershey School, he was definitely on a survive pathway. He was definitely utilizing that part of his brain the most, because it was most advantageous for him to do so. He lived a lifestyle and in a community where that was definitely something that was beneficial for him to do. So in order to work with it and help him to see that there was advantages to having his thrive brain online as well, to holding hope and be able to move forward in this life he had kind of stumbled into at the school, I definitely had to kind of understand that science or that neurobiology. That's kind of that first step that we just did together. I definitely had to build a community around him that was going to support him and do this through building these relationships. And it had to start with me. It had to start with the relationship I had with him. So let's look at the social neuroscience of relationships very, very quickly. You're going to get kind of a crash course in this, but that's okay. It gives us the idea or the science behind why it works to offer our brain this option of flock. So as we saw in that first section today, our brains, when we're in survival or stress mode, we have what we think are three options: fight, flight, or freeze, right? We looked at those three options today. And our brain will automatically go there if it feels threatened. We have to allow a brain to see a fourth option of this word flock, meaning I know when I start to become upset or overwhelmed or stressed, I have these other humans in my life that I can go to that are going to help me feel regulated and grounded. And that's really what flock is, creating that flock or that environment where there's a safety net of others to catch you if you feel like you're going in to fight, flight, or freeze. So for school professionals, this is so important, right? We know that the data that some of you analyzed in a previous group looked at, when students don't feel safe at school, some of the other things like self-harm, lower grades, substance use go up. And so we want them to feel safe and feel like they have a flock of other students to go to at school to give them this fourth F option. And what that's really about, what flocking is really about, is allowing our brains to attach and attune and regulate with another human through this process of finding a secure base. So when we're born, for the first 4 months of life, this is actually how quickly this forms, we form a primary attachment to a caregiver of some kind. Ideally, this would be a secure attachment. There's kind of 4 attachment styles. And ideally, it would be a secure attachment. But only 50% of children emerge from their first several years, months and years, with a primary attachment. With a secure attachment. So that means if you're a kindergarten teacher, for example, or a preschool teacher, likely 50% of your classroom does not have that experience of having a secure attachment. And what that really means is being able to see an adult in your life as someone that you can flock to. So as children, we learn that maybe a caregiver is a secure base. Certainly when we get to school, we start to use teachers, administrators, school lunch personnel. I actually had a beautiful story shared with me about a bus driver who was a secure base for a child. Other parents of other children, coaches. So there's all these opportunities to have these relationships in our life. And you all on this call are all examples of who could be a secure base for a child. And then, as adolescents, we start to use other adolescents as secure bases. And so I always joke with people who work with adolescents that this is why they don't always make the best decisions as a flock, but they're still trying to figure that out because it's good practice. As adults, we certainly use each other, our colleagues, our friends, our spouses, our partners as our secure bases as well. So let's look at what that really means. Let's kind of really break down what that means to be a secure base, to be a healing and healthy relationship, and offer that option of flock to another individual. And this is, again, like I said, the first way to help that survival brain quiet so that we can begin to use some of those prevention strategies like hope. So attachment, attunement, and co-regulation are the three pieces to this healing relationship puzzle. So attachment is someone being able to say, for example, a child being able to say to an adult, you keep me safe and you help me to believe that others can be safe too. That's really what secure attachment's all about. Now you can imagine what it would be like if a child, for example, my little guy that I talked about at the beginning there, he didn't have this experience. He doesn't know what it's like to have other adults to keep him safe. So you could imagine how threatening, overwhelming, scary the rest of the world would be, and why he would turn to, for example, belonging to a gang for that feeling of security. So you can kind of see how these steps happen and where in that kind of step or process that some of the preventative methods might be able to be helpful to head off some of the difficulties he might have later in life. So that's attachment. Attunement begins to happen with, we certainly don't have enough time to talk about mirror neurons today, but we have these amazing little neurons in the front part of our brain called mirror neurons. They allow humans and some actually other animals to talk to each other without using language at all. It's really a beautiful process. But attunement begins to happen. And what it is a child being able to say, you see me, you really get me or understand me, and therefore you help me to be able to understand myself or have this self concept. And then this final part begins to develop. It's called co-regulation. And what that means is being able to regulate due to the presence of another. So we are herd animals. That's why this flock process works so effectively. We're actually not meant to regulate fully on our own. And certainly children and adolescents, when we work with them, they also can't self-regulate very well. They're not meant to. We can actually, it's not something that we can actually do until our brains are fully developed in about our mid-20s. So the ability to co-regulate means you notice when I'm upset and you're distressed and you help me to calm down. And so this is all the three parts that go into that beautiful concept of being able to flock or use another human in that relationship to be able to quiet this survive pathway. So that's within a healthy healing relationship. There's other ways to kind of quiet this survive pathway. One is to reduce the noise. And this is something that actually could be done within an organization of just, and this is kind of two-part, not always doing things just because we've done them that way. So kind of reducing that rigidity. How can we get creative? How can we do things differently? And certainly this is a point that's been really highlighted by COVID-19 and this pandemic and kind of global crisis is it's led a lot of people to think about, well, we've always done it that way and now we've had to switch. Will we go back there or are we going to keep moving forward with innovation? And then this last one is really important too, is another way to quiet that survive pathways. Anytime you can eliminate uncertainty, because uncertainty is our brain's biggest threat, actually, is the thing that threatens our brains the most, because there's no solution. So our brains, when we go into that survival pathway or that reptilian brain, we really as humans like to problem solve in order to help ourselves feel better. Uncertainty is one of those problems that we can't solve. And so it leaves us kind of spinning in that survival pathway zone. So anytime you can kind of eliminate that uncertainty, give people back control. Now, this could be if you're a supervisor, it could be employees, it could be colleagues, it could be people that you work with through your job or organization. So these are kind of options that could be at the individual level. It could also be at the organizational level. One more thing I want to mention about reducing the noise, it could be simplifying information you put out there too. So for example, if you're someone who's in charge of kind of distributing company-wide emails, it could be thinking about how do I simplify that language? How do I break things down? Because we know that when people are stressed, and right now our baseline stress level from what we're seeing in the communities here in New Hampshire is higher than we would like. It's higher than our normal or typical baseline because of the past 18 months. So we want to try to simplify or break things down or putting things into chunks. For those of you who work with children, this is a strategy that we use with kiddos, right? When they're really struggling with schoolwork, for example, we might do scaffolding or break things into chunks or parts to help them not become overwhelmed by the information. The same thing goes for adults. Sometimes we need that too. So that is that reducing the noise part as well. So reduce the noise, eliminate uncertainty, and give some control back in some way. And now we're going to look at igniting this thrive pathway. So how do we kind of quiet that survival brain, get that to stop working overtime, and really start to ignite this thrive pathway of moving forward? So leaning on opportunity, not threats. So seeing change, this is something that's difficult for human nature wise for us to be able to do. We see change typically as something that actually starts our amygdala going. It's something that's often threatening to us. So we have to kind of be able to see change as something that might ignite our thrive pathways, as an opportunity to look at things differently, to do things differently, maybe to approach the world or life with authenticity in a different way. So there's this opportunity here when we're able to calm or quiet our survive pathway as maybe possibly moving forward and thrive in a different way. So hopefully this is getting some thinking going or kind of wheels turning out there as we go into our next small group session. Celebrate progress. So again, this could be one-on-one with someone you're working with in the community or at your job. It could be within your organization. And I know a lot of great organizations out there do this anyways, but this is a good reminder that this is actually scientifically based as to why this is effective. It does ignite our thrive pathway, being able to focus on progress or celebrate progress, and help us to see that opportunity moving forward. And then again, delegate control. So anytime we can give individuals within a system, and again, whether that be within a system of care or within an organization, voice and choice over how things look, how things are decided. Again, it's allowing that control, because if you think about your stress brain or your survival brain, what really happens when you're in that mode is you feel very out of control. So the knowledge or knowing what's happening to you is one way of getting back that control, being able to say, I'm having this response for a very good reason. I like to say say during this time in particular, during the last 18 months in particular, a lot of what we've experienced is a very normal reaction to a very abnormal life we had to live for the past 18 months. It's actually for us us that focus on neuroscience, it actually makes complete sense why we're seeing some of the stress responses that we're seeing. So that's one way to get back control, to be able to say in that moment, I'm feeling really angry or irritable today because my stress response system activated. That makes sense. That makes us feel more in control, less like we're out of control of our own feelings or emotions. But also just being able to have that voice and choice. So we often start to do things to give ourselves back control when we're feeling stressed. I gave the example earlier of controlling our eating. So some of us try to control our eating when we're feeling really stressed. So it makes sense that we would try to, if we gave back control in other areas, healthier areas, that would calm that survive brain as well and open up this thrive pathway. And all of this begins to build this concept of resilience. So we also want to look at resilience as a science, and goes hand in hand with hope. And this is one of those words, and I know some of our attendees today have heard me speak before. I talk a lot about resilience and what it actually means, because I think right now it's being used a lot. Especially with children, right? People are saying, well, children are incredibly resilient. We are, humans are resilient. Humans can be resilient if we're given some factors to help us be resilient. So we're not just resilient in a bubble on our own. We actually need these supportive relationships to help us move through that resiliency. So it's not just how many times do you get up after you've been knocked down, it's how many times you accept the outstretched hand after you've been knocked down. Just to kind of give that visual of, it's not just standing up again and again, it's being able to say that person has got their hand outreached to me. I can use that relationship to get back on my feet. And that actually is what building that resilience is all about. It's not about putting people in bubbles or bubble wrapping kiddos. It's allowing them to feel hard emotions like sadness, anger, frustration, disappointment, hurt, and suffering, without leaving them alone, with standing there right there with them as they're moving through those difficult emotions and being able to help them see, I did that. I sat with that sadness. I used my coping strategies to get out of that, with my caregiver as helping me through that. And now I know I can do hard things. That really was difficult. That didn't feel good, but I came out on the other side stronger. And that's really what building that resilience is all about. So being able to do that within the context of supportive relationships, building this sense of efficacy or perceived control. You can see some common themes here about why certain things work to rewire our brain. What we're talking about is rewiring our brains. And that is a very real concept. And these are the factors that help to do that. Strengthening adaptive skills. So helping individuals see that there are coping mechanisms that work to help counteract our stress response systems that aren't maladaptive. So lots of times the communities that we work with are using maladaptive coping strategies like self-harm, like substance use, to help counteract the difficult feelings that are happening with our stress response brain being activated. So strengthening some of those adaptive skills and self-regulatory capacities. And then there's our word of the day: hope, faith, and culture. So let's take a look at hope for a minute. So this is a quote that was shared with me by my own. So I have 3 kids of my own. They are 7, 5, and 4. And so my oldest was in kindergarten in March of 2020. And so she had her kindergarten year cut short. And when that all happened, her school has an amazing principal, and the principal sent out a letter to the families about, this difficult time and what we're going through. And this quote was a part of that email. And I immediately sent an email back and said, that is an amazing quote. Can I steal it? Because for me, this really helped to define what is can be a fairly nebulous kind of concept of hope. We use that word as another word, just like resilience, that we use a lot, but there is an actual science behind hope that it's a really powerful tool if we kind of think about it in the right ways. So hope isn't a feeling, it's actually a behavioral process. This is where that science of rewiring our brains comes in. It's a habit of mind. So again, it's a habit we have to practice. We have to use it. We have to really embody it in order for it to work. Born from overcoming adversity. So there's that concept again, right? We can't just have someone else deal with our adversity for us. We have to have someone else help us through or overcome our adversity so that we have the ability to see that hope can exist. The confidence that we have some influence on our own future. And that's the part that I want you to hold on to for right now, because that's the important part of why some individuals can't use the science of hope yet as a strategy. Hope doesn't exist without struggle. And struggle, of course, needs hope to not become suffering. And we have to lean into both. We have to lean into both the struggle and the hope to be able to kind of slowly but surely rewire our brains so that hope is an option as an adaptive coping skill. So hope is healthy. Hope's a really cool thing, actually. It has the power to alter our neurochemistry. If we rewire our brains and practice hope as a behavioral habit, it actually triggers healthy chemicals to be released to counteract some of those detrimental chemicals that are released by our stress response system. So in that way, hope does alter our neurochemistry. It releases endorphins and good feeling chemicals that we need in order to help us feel better when we're having that stress response. But of course, we have to get to that place where hope is an option. And so that's what we're gonna talk about in a minute. Hope is an option because we can see a future. It can facilitate the adoption of healthy behaviors. I love this one. If you think about what hope actually is, hope is the ability to see a future. If you see a future for yourself, you're far more likely to adapt to, or adopt the behaviors today, the healthy behaviors today, that are going to help to make that healthy future possible. So thinking about my kiddo, and the one that I worked with at the Milton Hershey School, if he didn't have hope or investment in his future, why would he do things like take care of himself, like stay away from danger or stay away from substances? He doesn't necessarily see the need to, because in that moment, those coping skills, maladaptive as they were functional for him. So being able to help him adapt and adopt some healthy behaviors had to really start with him being invested in a future that didn't involve those maladaptive behaviors. And this last one is actually really cool. So there's an inverse relationship between hope and lots of mental health diagnoses. So for those of you who are in the mental health professional field, you can kind of think about the diagnostic criteria of many mental health disorders includes something like hopelessness. So for those of you who aren't in the field, for example, depression, you have to, for it to be diagnosed officially with depression, someone like myself, a mental health professional, would have to go through the diagnostic criteria for depression and say there's 9, you probably have to meet 7, for example, in order to be diagnosed. One of those criteria might be hopelessness. So if you have hope, you don't have one of the symptoms or criteria of depression. I just think that's kind of a cool and easy one to see. But it can really be kind of directly an opposite to what some of the mental health diagnoses are. So let's talk really quick about my little guy, again, revisiting this. So for him, like I said throughout today, being able to use hope as an intervention was not going to be effective, right? He's living day to day. He's definitely living in what the epitome of survival is. He's having to really just survive day to day and get through. And what happens is, and this is what I'm about to talk about is the work of Dr. Bruce Perry. If you're interested in learning more about the kind of the neuroscience of stress and of trauma, he's definitely an amazing individual to kind of look into. He has a great website. So if you Google Dr. Bruce Perry and the neurosequential model, he has an amazing website with lots of information on there. And part of that is what I'm going to share right now. So he talked a lot about during the pandemic in particular, but it's applicable to life outside of COVID, about different kind of what we call state dependent functioning, meaning the whatever kind of state our brain is in determines kind of how we're functioning. And so he has this really beautiful chart on his website about if you're calm, kind of slightly elevated, all the way to feeling pretty overwhelmed, what parts of your brain are online and working or in control or in the driver's seat. And then conversely, kind of what some of the symptoms are that you're going to see if you're in hyper or hypoarousal. And then finally, what your sense of time is. And that's the part I really want to focus on for us today. If you're full blown in kind of the red zone, as he calls it, you are only thinking in the next minutes to seconds to minutes, really at best, right? And you hear people talking about this when they're really stressed. They say things like, I can't even think about tomorrow. I just have to get through today. That's kind of like that verbal kind of way of explaining, I'm in it right now and I can't even think about a future. Someone like that has very little ability to have hope. They can't see beyond today. They can't see a future for themselves. So for when this young man came to me, he was definitely kind of needle pinned, right? If you think about a car, needle pinned in that red zone most of the time. He was definitely just having to do whatever he could do to survive day to day. Even though he had been removed from his home situation and was in school at the Milton Hershey School with us, proverbially safe, right? He's safe, he's secure, he's having all his basic needs taken care of. They live in these beautiful student homes. They're fed all their meals. They're brought to, they're brought to a huge warehouse where they go shopping for their clothes and all their other basic needs and resources. So everything is physically taken care of for him. Physical safety, kind of physical resources taken care of. his brain is still kind of thinking about dodging, the next survival situation day in and day out. He had to really work, and we had to work very hard within our relationship to bring that survival brain back down. So I remember bringing him to because I was a young resident at the time. So I had pretty significant supervision. So I brought him and, what his story to my supervisor and explained what he was going through. And she said, gosh, it sounds like he's pretty hopeless. He doesn't have a whole lot of hope. And I said, no, absolutely. He definitely does not have a whole lot of hope. And she said, then it sounds like you need to hold that hope for him. And it was a concept that I had never heard or understood before, but we unpacked it right then. And for me, it was one of the most beautiful concepts to kind of think about. So for some of us, we can use hope as a behavioral process, as a coping mechanism to get through the struggle. We have the ability to see beyond today. We have the ability to invest in those healthy behaviors. For others, they don't, like this young man didn't have that ability. So what I could do for him was to create that relationship. So that was the first step, is to create that therapeutic relationship with him, right? And not all of us are therapists. And for some people in this call today, you've definitely heard me say this before. Not all of us are therapists, but every relationship can be therapeutic. So that relationship with him, it created a therapeutic relationship where I was able to say to him, I get that you can't see this future. I see it for you. I am invested in this relationship enough with you that I'm going to hold this hope for you. That's that concept of holding hope, is being able to say, you don't see that right now, and I get why you don't. I'm validating that. I get it. I understand that. And I love or care about you enough that I'm invested in this relationship enough to hold that hope for you. That changes someone's neurochemistry. Even if they're not ready to make that full change themselves, that changes them. That gives them that ability to say, there's someone else out there. There's that healthy healing relationship piece that can come in and help to foster or generate this science of hope to begin to happen. And so sometimes that's the best you can offer someone, is the ability to hold that hope for them. And that's incredibly powerful. For those of you that work with adolescents, this is an incredibly important kind of concept to be aware of, because for adolescents, they already live in a shortened time frame. They have a difficult time seeing beyond a day-to-day anyways, right? That's kind of where they're at developmentally. Everything that happens to them feels this big when it might be this big. And so for them, this is a really important concept anyways, to be able to say, I get that you don't have that right now. How do I help you see that I'm willing to invest in that for you until you can take it from me and run. So hopefully that, and I realize we're a little bit early, but that's exciting because we might have some more time to share and generate some ideas. How do you see some of these concepts of building these healthy relationships, quieting that survive pathway by reducing the noise, reducing the uncertainty, opening up opportunity and seeing change as potentially opportunity, being able to generate hope and that concept of hope for those that you work with or within your organization? How do you see this impacting or going forward in the future with your role or your organization?
Okay, so facilitators, this is get ready again. So you're thinking about those actions that you can take, and also identifying and filtering if there's any barriers. So thinking about both those things, actions and barriers. And we want to give you a little bit more time in this group. We're going to give you 15 minutes to talk this through in your groups. And hopefully everybody has an opportunity to share. Any questions before we go into the small group? I'm not seeing any. Okay. All right, folks, we'll see you back in 15. Hey, Mana, let's make sure we give them the full 15, if not 16
Hey,
minutes before we send that 1-minute warning, okay?
sure. You want
I
to
had a
stop
couple.
recording?
Thank you.
Yep.
Hey, welcome back, folks. Welcome back. I see everybody's coming back from their groups now. We're going to go ahead and let folks, if you wouldn't mind, just sharing a little bit of a summary, a 1-minute summary of the discussion within your group. And you can share either action items, if there was some consensus or some common themes that folks had around some action that they could take, or even some barriers that they see, any challenges that they, have identified that they think would be significant in applying this kind of approach to the work that you do. And if I could just call on some groups, if I could, Jane, can I pick on your group first? Or John, maybe you were the facilitator in that group?
John's the facilitator.
Perfect.
Yes, but I know Jane would love to speak up for our group, so no.
I would love to.
Anybody who, if I missed something, you want to add something, please do so. I think we tried not to go down. There were a lot of barriers. We had a very simple one action step, and that was completely overhaul the educational system. So that was, very simple, straightforward, kind of thing. But, recognizing how can we, be there, more regularly and establish relationships in schools and with the students and stuff to, let them know that there is somebody there, to help out. And unfortunately, a lot of times this stuff is intermittent, or a program comes along, you can spend a certain amount of time and then it's gone, and if we could have more consistency or continue, it would be so much better. Anybody else, want to correct what I said or add to it?
Not correct it, but add to it. But we mentioned the fact that, the parents need it too. The community needs it too, that it wasn't just the students, it's coming from somewhere. And being able to build that hope within the community itself and with the parents themselves. That was the only thing.
Thank you, Kim.
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay. How about room 1 or group 1 that has Regina, Lauren, Anika?
So I'll speak and then you guys can jump in. So we talked about how specifically in education right now, but maybe in a lot of other arenas, there's so much happening outside of the system, so much negativity, and that we need internally, we kind of need to focus inward and find the hope. And we talked about how one of the barriers can be sometimes not knowing what the hope is. So really identifying what that would be. And talking about the importance of, struggle being important and understanding that, and yet struggle without the hope then. I think there was a slide about that earlier, like how negative that can be. So just, we all agreed that focusing on hope is very, very much needed. I don't know if anyone else wants to jump in.
Well, and I think what we said too was like, what's our sphere of influence, right? Like maybe we obviously after the 1.5 years of COVID, there's just a lot of craziness, but like within our school or within our neighborhood or within our family or within our work office, like where can we start to work on building hope and creating that vision, because there's so many external things we can't control. So yeah, being I guess especially thinking of children, being a place where they see that feeling hopeful is possible.
Terrific. How about room 3? That's got Deb, uh, Joe, Susan in there.
Yep.
Somebody want to volunteer?
Sure. I think that was my room. We talked a lot about the idea of that, one adult in your court, and just the importance of mentorship. So we spent a lot of time chatting about that. Personally, I shared my organization's kind of working through the coalition building process. And so I see it's the UNH project around resiliency. So I kind of picked up on that thread because not everyone has really liked the idea of resiliency because it sort of maybe implies that something was wrong, or that kind of thing. So I liked the idea of kind of bringing more of the hopeful angle to it. But yeah, we mainly focused on just how overwhelmingly important, like prior to COVID, but especially now, just that idea of mentorship really is, and how it can be woven into so many different organizations.
I was just going to follow up on that. The 3 domains that you have there of the healing relationships, they're all concrete and they're all doable. You don't need $1 million to do this. You just need one caring, trusted adult in a youth's life. And that's one thing that I did share, is that we've been working with Brooklyn Rainey. She has done 3 different programs for our organization and community. And Brooklyn is the author of One Trusted Adult. In fact, she's going to be speaking this Wednesday night. New Futures is doing that event called Quest. It's most of you probably have been invited to that. And it's really critical. That's one thing that we're focusing on is mentoring, and particularly even pre-COVID, in this media-driven world that we have. Kids are, becoming more connected online and less connected to human beings, and it has a lot of negative fallout for them. And so, to be able to implement some of these strategies, these trauma-informed strategies, I think it's more critical today than ever before. So, and I really appreciate this presentation. It's very well done.
Can I just quickly speak to what Deb said? We actually had Brooklyn in for 2 assemblies this morning.
Oh.
And she was fabulous. That's how she was our Red Ribbon Week kickoff, thanks to the referral from Katie. But one of the things that we noticed, and more so even with our 9th grade than the 7th and 8th grade, these kids don't even know how to sit together respectfully in an assembly anymore. They haven't done so since middle school.
Yeah.
And there were a few things that happened that were just, showing how much we need to kind of reteach some of that basic social etiquette and connection and respect. It's not that they necessarily did anything to her, but at the end, they didn't even clap. They just got up and started walking out. So,
wow.
But she did reach them. She was great. Yeah. The presentation was great. It was just the little nuancy things that show how isolated these kids have been and not doing these large group herd flock type activities. That's all.
And it's made, what we're seeing is it's made flocking stressful. And so we're having to recalibrate that social capability, that attunement, that attachment. We're having to kind of help them push through that difficulty in order to be kind of able to be comfortable in that flock situation, right? They've all retreated to these online worlds that don't allow that practice. And so, I'm going in for the same reason to Nashville, the 2 Nashville high schools next week, because they're seeing that same increase in difficulties with being with each other live and in person. So, and if we think about us as adults, I don't know about you all, but the first time I re-entered the society, so to speak, going back out and presenting live in person for the first time, even going to the grocery store or someplace where there was a large group of people, it was difficult to kind of recalibrate myself. And I had all the skills. And so, to think about some of these teenagers that are really retreated, like you said, withdrawn, isolated themselves, we're going to have to do a lot of kind of backtracking and understanding and meeting them where they're at in order to help them see flock as an option again.
Yeah. There's a lot of truth to that. I just wanted to say that flocking, adults are feeling like you just was saying. I know I'm an extrovert, so I really missed, I just felt like I was draining down because of COVID. My husband's an introvert, and I now I'm having to drag him kicking and screaming just to do this small, like little events. He doesn't want to go. He liked that. He kind of liked that sort of isolation and isolation. And so, but I'm making sure that we do it incrementally. So not to, scare him, traumatize him.
Yeah, overwhelming system, right?
Trauma.
Yeah. And so we threw all the, just to relate that to adolescents, we threw them back into school saying it's the best thing for them. Don't get me wrong, to be back live and in person, and to be able to take a minute to recognize that was a huge jump for them. A lot of them, I saw a statistic that most teenagers, I want to say it was like 80-something%, don't get touched unless they're at school. And that to me was, and even with the person I was talking to was a well-educated, well-regulated adult. She said, I have 2 teenagers. I can't tell you the last time I hugged them. It's just something that gets missed. And so to have these kiddos re-enter and not have that touch or that community or that sense of feeling from another human for so long, that's substantial.
It is.
Yeah.
We have time for one more share out.
Sorry, I went on a tangent there.
That's okay. That's all right. It's good stuff, good communication. One more, is there one more group that wants to volunteer that has something really burning they want to share out?
I do. So one of the barriers that was identified in this particular barrier, I just wanted to express, is one of the barriers is that around here there's a large transient population and homeless population. So the opportunity to really build those relationships is very limited because you don't really know the next time you're going to see them. So we really kind of discussed ways to open up those connections and share information with service providers that work directly with, young people or people that are manifesting those behaviors that, we went over earlier as a trauma response. So we thought about developing messaging and toolkits because, the first part is identifying the problem and making people aware of, what those symptoms look like. But the second part is identifying tools and evidence-based practices to help offset those behaviors. And one of the things that I had mentioned was, like the 40 developmental assets could be a possible tool to provide people when they are working with, young persons that are having those behaviors and trauma responses. So that's it.
Thank you so much. And if you have something else that you want to share with the group, please go ahead and enter that into the chat. We have one more small group breakout before we, and one more report out that we want to make sure that we get to for today's meeting. And one segue, Allison, I'll just kind of mention this as a segue too, is, Allison and I were talking during the break and thinking about, for those of you that don't necessarily work with individuals and applying this practice to individuals, that you can think about it as it relates to community systems and working with community coalitions as well. And oftentimes, starting with the vision is one of those places. Thinking about the mission, thinking about the overall vision, the positive aspect. So with that, I'm going to throw things back to you, Allison.
Yeah, so that was a great segue of just kind of this final small group discussion. And some of you may have even started to go here with your previous group. So maybe just even having a deeper conversation about it. But as Mary Ellen's saying, is just kind of thinking about if you started to implement some of these strategies, some of these preventative care methods, what would you hope to see as that vision? What would you hope to see as that outcome, that kind of ultimate outcome at the end? What would it look like in your world, in your community, if you started to see the success of making some of these changes or action steps possible? What would you hope would go better or look different? These are all kind of just kind of throwing different things out, kind of ways to think about this. We called it, when we were doing our planning, meeting for this particular meeting, we call it that pie in the sky vision. What would that look like? Even if you think it might be years down the road, what would be that desired outcome? Or alternatively, what might be some outcomes, kind of step outcomes that you would see along the way? I'll leave you with that and kind of launch you into your final small group discussion.
Yes, so facilitators, get ready one more time. So again, that pie in the sky. And also, if you have any lingering questions,
Yes.
if there's anything as it relates to this topic that you want to make sure that Dr. Allison answers, or that is discussed here in this group, go ahead and identify that as well. We're going to give you 5 minutes in this breakout group. So we'll see you back here in 5. Looks like. There you go, recording in progress. So let's go ahead and start. I'm going to start actually with group 10 or room 10. If you have anything that you want to report out or share from this last small group, and also any lingering questions that you have.
There, now I can see some more we can all see faces, which is nice too.
So that room 10 is Olivia, Tracy, and Trisha. Anything to report out on?
Tracy's trying to report out. Sometimes it takes a little while for her microphone to rev up.
I know, my microphone is not working. Can anyone hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Communicating information to our communities would be beneficial, resulting in more integrated and connected communities. Mandatory screenings and book readings, and doing a multimedia campaign at schools to try and get these kids into knowing about hope and just being able to have that human connection again, and learning who their flock is. I think that is huge for them.
Yeah, I think this is great, because I think sometimes we miss thinking about telling kids what's going on for them, especially in their own brains. And when I've shared this information with the adolescents I've worked with, it's powerful. They definitely latch onto it. They get it. It helps them to feel like they're not going crazy, right? I mean, you feel pretty out of control of your body when you're going through this stress response. So it helps them to instantly have a little bit more of a calming effect if they know what they're actually going through. So I appreciate those kind of thoughts. Absolutely.
Okay. How about group 9? Anne, Crawford, Kathleen, and Lisa are in that group?
Or I'll jump in there, and guys join me. So just some things we came up with in the last discussion that we were hoping for is a quality childcare available for free for everyone. We were dreaming big. Also available for everyone is community awareness, that and a building of really caring communities that have a full awareness of ACEs and their effects, and that it was normalized and destigmatized, so that anyone who was identified was rallied around and supported, just like they would any other illness or anything else that they were working to cope with and live the best they can and thrive. So that's kind of what we were we're dreaming for.
Good pie in the sky there.
No.
Okay, how about group 8, room 8, Alice, Alyssa, Barbara, Cora, Heidi are in this group?
We talked a lot about pie in the sky, just overall recognition across sectors that these behaviors are trauma responses. We also talked a lot about just having more mentorship programs for high-risk youth within school systems, et cetera. In addition to that, just making sure that there's evidence-based curriculums in school, like their designated space, and somebody within the school teaching those programs. Also a goal was to also utilize the information learned within this COP with teams during times of transition and moments of stress and crisis.
I encourage anybody that has any lingering questions, if you have any lingering questions that you would like for Dr. Allison, please, if you could just go ahead and type them into the chat. Room 4, anything to report out for your group? That would Marissa, Maura, Monica.
Sam, did you want to share some of what we talked about? Not to put you on the spot, but I feel like you had, that what you said some really great words about kind of hope is related to outcomes and some of the things you want to see kind of short term and long term.
Yeah, so I was tying more in my thinking to kind of how we use hope to transition the outcomes that we see. And so we started to have some conversation around like violence that was happening or, that was shared in the larger group, like reintroducing how to leave an assembly where we don't leave a Zoom room by clapping because we're all on mute. We just turn it off and leave. So no wonder why these kids just got up and left, because that's what they're kind of conditioned to do. So like, how do we use hope in like changing outcomes? And so there was a story that I had captured about like some dads on duty is what they called themselves, saw that this violence increase was coming into the schools and they chose to do something about it. And they kind of instead chose to attack this outcome instead of continuing this violence or going towards like suspensions and out of schools and all these things. Instead, these dads were like, let's fill these kids with positivity. And so they came in and were giving high fives and being like, today's going to be a great day. Like, hey, I love that new hat, and changing the outcome and the attitude of the kids. And they did some interviews with the kids, and the kids showed like, hey, like these people are showing up. They were holding hope for the kids, right? Not even knowing that that's what they were doing. But that's how it kind of connected. And so seeing, because you can show up, you can create different outcomes. And so just by this simple act of showing up and holding that space and that hope, I think it's possible for us to do that. So I just kind of saw that in the news, and Marissa, I think, found the link to it. So if you want to hear about it, but it was like that feel-good story that just was a real life example of how we can change those outcomes by the simple actions that we're doing and creating that space. So that was what we kind of chatted about.
Excellent. We have about 2 more minutes left. Anybody else want to share?
I think we're group 3. I'm happy to share for us. Our pie in the sky is we wanted to see reduced risk behaviors, whether that be substance misuse, overdose, deaths, mental health issues such as anxiety and depression and suicide. These are all trending in the wrong direction, and we want to see that incidence be reduced. We talked about increased connectivity and mentorship, teaching tools that build engagement, environmental tools to increase engagement on the ground so that we can build public will for change, and support programs that reflect these strategies of hope that we're talking about today, and learning more about how we can actually implement this change. I think that's really critical, and we're all in it together. And I think that's our challenge, is to help those that maybe are the grandparents or just people in the neighborhood, if there is such a thing anymore, They used to be, that care about kids and help them understand how they can be part of the solution.
Absolutely. Might have time for one more. Anybody else want to share something that hasn't been said already?
In group 6, basically, I think the big thing that we had come up with was our pie in the sky goal is that not a single kid that every kid would have that minimally that one significant adult that they could turn to in times of distress, you know.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Great conversation, some really, really great dialogue and thought. I'm going to go ahead and wrap up our meeting. We've got just a few minutes left. And I promised, I think at the very beginning of our meeting, that we would make sure to show you the evaluation link. And just a heads up, when you, we're going to go ahead and put that evaluation link in the chat. And when you click on it, it'll take you out of this meeting. So if you want to hang on for some resources, but we really, really do want your feedback. And that's how we issue our certificates for those that participate today. And really, it'll only take you 1 minute to complete that evaluation. If you have not already, please do visit our website at nhtac.org. That's New Hampshire Technical Assistance Center. And here is where you can sign up for this community of practice. You can view recorded meetings. This one will be available on our website next week. We promise it by, along with the PowerPoint, all PowerPoints that were shared today and any other resources. And if there's ideas and thoughts and questions in the chat, we usually pull those from meetings and we'll create a resource there as well. So all of our meeting materials can be viewed on our site. You can also request technical assistance on this site. If something sparked your interest today and you think, gosh, I really want to delve deeper into that topic, or I really want some assistance in this area, do go ahead and reach out to us. We are here for you. Okay, so go ahead and Mana, if you have not already done so, please throw that evaluation link into the chat. And again, folks, thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it. And Dr. Roy, really excellent thoughts and insights. Thank you so much for being with us today. Yes, we will applaud.
Thank you for having me. It's exciting. Yeah. Thank you all for doing the hard work. Appreciate it.
Have a great rest of your day, folks. Take care.
Thank you.